One of the very strange things that has happened in this world of ours is that some 1935 years ago, a man walked this earth and raised the dead. This had a meaning for us, perhaps beyond anything that men have dared to imagine. And this meaning was buried in such a way that we have now come to praise the activity with no thought whatsoever of emulating that activity. None of us have taken it upon ourselves to say, because he raised the dead, I too must learn how to do this. And as a matter of fact, it is this very praise of the deed which has buried it. We have very calmly witnessed miracles and have said, the Son of God did these miracles. And then having made that mental commitment to say that he was the Son of God, you wouldn't expect me to do the same. We have laid it aside on the shelf. So much so that wherever Billy Graham goes these days, there's a great big conclave about the second coming. The second coming, because the first was misunderstood. The first demonstration of the resurrection of the dead being misunderstood, and orthodoxy having now taken and deified him who raised the dead, it is as if it were saying, you don't expect us to do it. We're not virgin-born sons of God. We're just the church. Don't look at us for anything like that. But wait until Jesus Christ returns to earth again. And then you will see the same miracles. And those who have sinned, this will happen and that will happen. And you know that all of our youth who was being brought up to believe in this rubbish is being submitted to the same lie that has been perpetuated through the centuries, which has led finally to a place in history where man is unable to govern himself intelligently. He has found that no power in medicine and in science can prevent disease. He has found that no agreement between nations can prevent war. He has found that no commercial agreements can be reached to prevent poverty and starvation. The human mind is exposed as being incapable of preventing the war, the pestilence, the disaster, the various sufferings of this world. Nor can prayer to the Father remove these sufferings. And because of this, complete unawareness of the message of the resurrection of the dead, man has fallen to that position where he regards himself as a person who must die. He would never dream of thinking himself to be anything than a mortal being. And there is no one in the church who is trying to persuade him that he is not a mortal being. As far as the church is concerned, he's not only a mortal, he's a mortal sinner. But something happened on this earth that the infinite way is not about to ignore. We are not about to walk on the other side of the street and close our eyes to it. There was a raising of the dead on this earth. And we too were told to go forth and raise the dead. And we must approach that mission with an understanding of the task. Mortality means to perish. That which is mortal dies. That which is immortal is not perishable. And if we be mortal, we be perishable. And if we be perishable, the brain within us perishes with us. And if we are using now a perishable brain, all that it can perceive, all that it can know is that which perishes. The mortal sense of life can only know that which is mortal. Mortality cannot glimpse immortality. That which must die can only associate with that which must die. Now let us look at a child of 12 who is dead. Her father's name is Jairus, and he is a nobleman, one of high authority. He apparently was a convert to the Hebrew faith from the Romans, and now, because of his high authority, those of the Hebrew temple are coming to Jesus to persuade him to heal this man's 12-year-old daughter. There was a Hebrew superstition that after 3 days the soul left the body. The silver cord was cut, and never again could that soul re-enter the body. And if you look closely at the various resurrections in the Bible, you will see that Jesus took them one at a time. First, this child who had just died and was still in bed. And then someone who had died a day and a half and was already in the coffin on the way to be buried. And then to break the false Hebrew superstition completely about the 3-day period in which the soul could not re-enter the body after that, he specifically waited 4 days for Lazarus before appearing before the tomb. This was the slow succession of removing completely, for all time, the nonsense about a soul interred in matter, and to reveal something far greater than these baseless superstitions of the mortal mind. Now we have this girl. Yes, she was dead according to the physicians, and mark this very carefully. She could not see or hear or touch or feel or know. Her physical senses were dead. The brain was dead. The heart was dead. The organs were dead. everything in that physical body was dead. So much so that paid mourners were there, mourning. That was their profession, to mourn for the dead. This was a dead girl, if you believe that there is life in a physical body. Now then, the revelation there, when he said, she is not dead, she sleepeth, is that there is no life in a physical form. There is no life in physical senses. He was looking at that which man called the mortal self. He was looking at you and at me, the mortal self, which man was pronouncing dead. And he said, she sleepeth. He was seeing a life where the world saw death. He was seeing immortality where the world saw mortality. Shall we wait for a second coming before we see it again? Or shall we stand by that bedside now and see what he saw then, but see it now as it is? If you look with dead senses, you're going to see death. But suppose you look with life. Suppose you look with that vision, which is of the Spirit. Suppose you first see the eye of your own being before you try to find the eye of another. And so what stood before this bedside? What stood before this girl that was different than everyone else who stood there looking at her? I stood there looking at her. Not a dead physical being, but I, the living Spirit of God, stood there in a form that appeared to people as Jesus, but it was I, the Christ, standing looking at this girl. And what does I, the Christ, see? The immortal I, the immortal Christ, can only behold itself. The immortal I saw the immortal I. And she awakened and asked for food. Now this immortal I in her, awakened by the recognition of it by one who stood in the immortal I, now awakened not only that I, but that I awakened the dead senses. Now those senses were not being governed by chance. Now those senses were not being murdered by the cosmic or the unconscious mind. Now this girl was not a channel for the lie about immortality. The immortal I of her own being was recognized, and it became the law of her being. And it now animated the senses. It gave her a desire for food. And she was 12. And so we know that as Jesus himself, speaking in the temple at 12, was able to educate the elders, she had gone through the transition of rebirth. And the Christ, in the form of Jesus, and the Christ within her being one and the same, the immortal self now, which had ever been present through centuries of human time, was emerging to take dominion over the false human mind. Now, before Jesus brought us this resurrection of the girl, he very carefully laid the groundwork to show us that where we see through a glass darkly, with a mortal mind, with a mortal consciousness, with mortal senses, there is an invisible life present, which is not mortal, which is not subject to chance, which is not subject to human powers, which is not at the discretion of one individual or a nation or a body of material laws, and through a succession of ascending demonstrations, he took us first to the transformation of matter, water to wine, to demonstrate that matter which can be transformed is not of God. It isn't real. It has no basis because it has no permanence. It can be changed. He demonstrated that there is a consciousness which can take dominion over all of the matter of this world. And then he next demonstrated that the power of the human brain has been grossly exaggerated, and the evidence of the human brain is not reliable. For the human brain declared that this one had epilepsy, and this one had dementia, and this one was insane. But again, that certain something called I, that immortal self, could take dominion over the evidence of the brain and restore the epileptic, the insane, to normalcy, proving the non-power of the brain. And then into the fleshly body to show the non-power of that. We see the lame and the halt and the withered. Again, the claims of the body. The claim that we live in a body of flesh, which has the power to be crippled or lame or sick or diseased. Again, this immortal self takes control over that and removes them from the material laws which claim that the fleshly body can of itself be sick or diseased. This is a mounting demonstration. Next to the incurable diseases, the palsy, the leprosy. And we find again that which is mortal, that which appears and must die, that which we have accepted to be our self, is subject to a higher power which takes control over it and restores it to normalcy. All these leading to the king of terrors, the greatest terror in the world, the fear of death, and showing that mortality is not reality. Mortality can be controlled. But in order for it to be controlled, there must be a recognition of an immortal self within yourself and within the self of the individual who appears to be mortal. And first, the daughter of Jairus, and then the son of the widow at Nain. Now we have a funeral procession, a boy being buried, a widow marching with a funeral. But what does he say? I say, young man, arise. What is the message for you and for me? This mortal self is not what it appears to be. God is immortal. God is all. Now then, if God is all and God is immortal, where can there be anything unlike God? Where can mortality be if God is all and God is immortal? Young man, I say, arise. And then the nobleman's son, the centurion. Now you see it done absently, not even in the presence of the victim. When the centurion says, help my son, and again Jesus doesn't respond instantly. He says, please help him, I know you can. Go thy way, thy son liveth. Why? Because there could be no acceptance of mortality. If there were an acceptance of mortality, then we have an acceptance that God is not all. Who among us has accepted that God is all, God is immortal, and therefore mortality is impossible? That is where we start. It isn't where we end, it's where we begin. Once we have accepted that immortality is the only possibility because God is all, then we must take a second look at what we have thought to be our mortal self. I cannot be mortal because that's a statement that there is a life apart from God. God is life. God is immortal life. There's no other kind. If I am mortal life, then I have stated that my life and God's life are two different kinds. How can I expect divine life to support that which is not divine life? I've declared myself out of divine law. But now I'm accepting what Jesus was demonstrating, that immortality is the reality of the child that appears dead, of the child that is buried, and now of Lazarus, who was buried in the tomb for 4 days. He wasn't concerned about the soul departing from the flesh and then not being able to return. He knew the soul could not depart from the flesh because there is no mortal flesh there. Now, our 40 days in the wilderness must follow his. And those words, 40 days, mean one thing. As long as it is necessary to come to a conclusion about the truth. So those 40 days could be 400 or 4 million, depending on how long it is necessary for you to reach that agreement with the truth which permits you to say, there cannot be God Spirit and God matter. Matter dies. God is non-dying, and therefore the matter that dies is not of God. There cannot be two worlds, heaven and earth. any more than there can be immortality and mortality. There can only be the kingdom of God. And when I am in spiritual consciousness, that is where I am, in the kingdom of God, in immortal selfhood. Now then, your day in the wilderness is the confrontation with the belief that you are a material mortal being. And if you step out of the wilderness until you have found your answer, you have not had your 40 days in the wilderness. You step out of the wilderness when you know that I am immortal being. And because the flesh is mortal, I am not in the flesh. There can be no quibbling there. As long as you believe you're in the flesh, you have accepted mortality and have not found that I, that immortal self, which the Spirit of Jesus saw in the girl, in the boy, and in Lazarus. That immortal I was there revealed not only as your immortal self, but as the only self on this earth. There is no mortal being on this earth. The revelation of immortality is universal. And you don't have to wait for Jesus Christ to come back to earth. For if you believe on me, the works that I do ye shall do, and greater works shall ye do. This was the total, universal revelation, that if you believe on me, and me is that immortal I, which was revealed in the daughter of Jairus, in Lazarus, in the son of the widow at Nain, and later in Jesus himself, if you believe on this immortal I as the substance of your being, then the works that the I did as the living Christ consciousness in biblical days, it is prepared to do now in you and as you. That which Christ consciousness did yesterday, it can and will do today. The nature of Christ consciousness is never a variable. It appeared as Jesus. It resurrected the dead. And by that is meant that it discovered the latent divinity where the world saw mortal flesh. To discover your latent divinity where the human mind had presented the idea of mortal flesh, this is the raising of your own self from the dead. And then to look out in this world on all those around you, regardless of the level of their consciousness, and to address yourself to the immortal I of their being. This is raising the dead. Now, as this begins to catch on, and you see that the immortal I was the real healer behind the scenes, that the immortal I is life itself, and once it is recognized, that life begins to overrule the appearance of death, then you do not wait for death in a physical form. You look for life now. You look now for the immortal I of your own being. And this is your 40 days in the wilderness. You go inside to your own I. And there must be a decision reached. Am I mortal or immortal? Now. Am I perishable or non-perishable? Now. What is my status? Who am I? And when you come face to face with your reality, that you are the Spirit of God, then you can see why it was necessary to reveal the immortal I of those who apparently were dead. Because that immortal I of them is not mortal flesh, but spiritual selfhood. And the nature of each of us is that our spiritual selfhood has made possible that which appears as our physical selfhood. Behind the mortal appearance is the immortal I. And when your consciousness rests in the immortal I and flows forward from that, it governs that which appears as the mortal self. When Paul tells us that this corruptible must put on incorruptibility, this mortal must put on immortality, did he mean wait for a second coming of Christ? When Jesus tells us the kingdom of God is within you, did he say, wait till I come back to earth 2,000 years later? He said, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. What was he telling us? That within you, as in him, as in the daughter of Jairus, as in the others, there is the immortal I. He was revealing the meaning of the Word was made flesh. He was revealing that man on earth must be Christed. He was revealing that the churches on earth must be Christed. He was revealing truth, which belongs to no person and to no one religion. He was revealing the universality of the Christ and the need to accept this in our consciousness is the coming of the Christ into us as the realization of self. It has nothing to do with the second physical appearance of a man. It never has had. And our evangelists, our clergymen, 99% of them are still living in the deadness instead of raising the dead within themselves to the revelation of their immortality, and then going forth to bless each individual in their congregations with the recognition of their immortality, to witness the Christ in every man. So it is said, your righteousness must exceed the righteousness of the scribes and of the Pharisees. Because until you perceive the immortal selfhood of your own being and the immortal selfhood of every individual on the face of the earth, your claim to righteousness is untrue. There is hardly one righteous man on this earth, because to be righteous, you must look out on a world in which there is nothing that exists that is unlike God. Now that is your immortal consciousness. When you are trained to look out and perceive nothing unlike God, and whatever you perceive that is unlike God, you must raise it from the dead through the recognition of its non-reality, non-power, non-substance, non-law, non-activity. If it is not of God, how can it exist? that which must die is not of God. And so at this early chapter in the Infinite Way, when we first read it, we may not have been impressed with the totality of its revelation. But at this date we can say this. We were told that we do not live in a human form, and that if we associate our life with a human form, we are associating with that which must die. We were told to be absent from the body and present with the Spirit. We were told to recognize within ourselves an eternal flame and to see that our life is a continuity of consciousness with no beginning, no end, not existing in human time, and that our consciousness, being immortal, will ever make use of whatever forms seem necessary at the moment throughout all of our human spans. And this is the consciousness now of the immortal self, which we are told to live in, to abide in, without ceasing. You have your 2 commandments for that purpose. You are recognizing your own immortal selfhood with all your soul, all your mind, all your body, all your heart, all your strength. And that outlaws the possibility of the physical form being you. It outlaws the possibility of the human mind being you. It takes you out of human mind and human body. Not until you're on a deathbed and someone has to come along to find it. You're finding it yourself. You're accepting the message of the resurrection of the dead demonstrated on earth by the Christ. And you're accepting that if you believe on the presence of this I in you, this I in you will do the mighty works it did then. You're accepting this I as your immortal selfhood. And now you're entitled to say, I and the Father are one. For you have received from the Father the Father's immortal selfhood. Son, all that I have is thine. And the Father further says, don't let any fool on this earth persuade you to wait for the second coming of Jesus Christ. Because I, the infinite self, can never leave thee. I have never left thee. I am with thee always, unto the end of the world. I cannot return because I have never left. This is part of our 40 days in the wilderness. We have the total world conditioning of religion and science and mental sciences to stand up to in the realization that all of the world sees mortality, death, deterioration, aging. But I believe on the inner Christ. And I live out of that belief. And therefore I see the inner Christ of the doctor, the inner Christ of the clergyman, the inner Christ of the physicist, the inner Christ of all those who do not believe on the inner Christ. For they have not learned the message of the resurrection of the dead. The dead, or the sleeping, are those who live in the consciousness of matter, unaware that matter, which must die, is not a creation of God. And if you're going to go through 11 more chapters, if you're going to go through 20, 30, 40, 50 more years on this lifespan, surely this is the moment to come to grips with the idea that I cannot go through it as matter. For that which was not created by God has no real existence. And if I live in matter, as matter, identified as matter, then I am under material law, which is not under the law of God. And that's why you have this as the first chapter. It's the first thing to do. There must be an immortal you. If there is no immortal you, then there is no child of God. There is no spiritual being. It is because of this false teaching, then, and man's unawareness of his immortal I, that he lives with a sword of Damocles hovering over his head. The fear that this sword will come down and take his human life away, take his physical form away, take his possessions away, or damage him in some way. Around every corner lurks a casualty in man's mind. Most people live with this fear hovering over them. And its undercurrents run through the mind in many ways. We are so easily influenced. Not knowing the immortal self, we live in fear of losing the mortal self, which isn't us. And that mortal self is always subject to chance. And so you find the medical profession, the insurance profession, the media, the press, TV, radio, newspapers, all bringing to you the story about mortality. Ever pouring more coal on the fire of fear. Your mortal senses, your mortal mind will perish. You might as well face the fact that no mortal senses or mortal bodies are beyond that. And therefore, you must also face that your mortal senses and mortal body are not a divine creation. The eyes you look out with were not created by God. The ears you hear with were not created by God. The heart that theoretically keeps you alive was not created by God. The natural man receiveth not the things of God and is not under the law of God. And so no one in this world is under the law of God. There's no sense telling us to wait for the second coming of Christ. While we're waiting, we're not under the law of God. But if so be the Spirit dwells in you, then are you the Son of God. If so be you dwell in spiritual consciousness. Now, Jesus further tells us that that which is born of the flesh is flesh and mortal. That which is born of the Spirit is spirit and immortal. Again, are you both? Don't make that mistake. You cannot be both. Choose ye this day whom ye shall serve, the spirit or matter, immortality or mortality, God or mammon. For if you accept birth of the flesh, you are flesh. And then this corruptible is not putting on incorruptibility. But if you accept your spiritual birth as your identity, then henceforth know not yourself after the flesh. I am not of the flesh. I am not born of the flesh. I am not mortal being born to die. And then the truth of your immortal self is the truth that makes you free. Now, what do you have to do to protect your immortal self? Give it a moment's thought. What do you have to do to protect your immortal body, your immortal mind? Can you protect the Spirit? Can you protect the Christ? Can you protect the Christ mind, the Christ life? And if that is you, what protection do you need? If you need protection, then you have more days to spend in the wilderness. You must go back to your wilderness until you can come forth and know that because I am spiritual being, immortal selfhood, Christ and Christ mind, because all that the Father hath, I am. Because I am the truth, I am the way, I am the wine, I am the water, I am the light. That which the Father is, I am. When you know this, you need no protection. And if you have a desire for protection, you are denying your immortal selfhood. And you will be able to judge where you stand by whether or not you feel you need protection. If you can say, I need no protection because the Spirit needs no might or power to defend itself, it recognizes no other life than the spiritual life. Against whom shall it defend? So every time you find you want protection, you are saying, I am of the flesh. I am mortal. I was born of the flesh and will die in the flesh. You have not benefited by the raising of the dead demonstrations of the Christ in the form of Jesus. And you have not raised yourself from the dead beliefs of a material selfhood. Now that is basically part of the essence of the chapter on immortality. It is revealing that God created no mortal being. God is spirit. And there is no mortal being on this earth. That immortality is the true nature of all who walk the earth in the seeming body of flesh. And it is revealing this that you, if you are prepared, may believe on it, may accept it, and then having made the initial steps of acceptance, are prepared to walk as an initiate in the realization that I, being the immortal self, the one indivisible, spiritual being that walks this earth, everywhere I will invest my relationships with that understanding. I will never enter into a relationship without first knowing myself to be the immortal self, and then through this letting myself recognize the immortal self in another. And once this relationship has been established on that basis, that which I have joined together, no man can rend asunder. Whether it be business or marriage, whatever the nature of the relationship be, it is blessed with success because you have brought into it the new dimension of immortality. You have recognized first in you, I, the invisible self. And second, in him or in her or in it or the condition, I, the invisible self. This recognition of I as the essence of all that is there assures you of being under divine law as divine activity, secure, protected, for the I will go before that relationship in every way. Now you see, we're taking immortality out of a deathbed in the hills of Galilee. We're bringing it into this moment, into the realization that the immortal I revealed there is the same immortal I that indwells my very being. The same immortal I that indwells the fellow I saw yesterday as some kind of an inferior human being. The same immortal I that indwells every relationship on this earth, but has gone unseen by the mortal eyes of men. When we begin investing that recognition in everything we do with everyone, we are loving our neighbor, and not until then. I cannot love you if I think of you as a mortal being. All I can do is malpractice you that way. If you see me or I see you as mortal beings, we have not learned that we are here to raise the dead, to lift our vision above matter which must deteriorate into the vision of spirit, which is endless and unchanging. And so today is really a beautiful chance for all of us to take the two commandments and to see that as we put them together, we are being told to recognize the immortal I everywhere. In myself, in my wife, in my husband, in my friend, in my child, in my parent, in my business associate, wherever it is, and it is omnipresent, I must recognize it. And preparatory to recognizing it, I must find it in myself. Because I will try to recognize it with a human mind and I will fail. I will have clouds without rain. I will have vain repetitions. I will have affirmations. I will have words without substance. For only the I of my being can recognize the I that indwells every other individual on earth. You must begin with yourself. You must make the change in consciousness from mortal self to immortal self. That's your beginning. And as you feel this I of you recognized, instead of a me, instead of a human brain, you'll know that your days in the wilderness are going to be shorter and shorter. You'll also know that to emerge before this has been completely clarified, until I in you have been born, until Christ in you is realized, until you have recognized the presence of God in you where you stand, you're not ready to go forth and raise the dead. You're not ready to go forth into divine relationships. You're not ready to go forth protected from the world consciousness of disease and disaster. Now let's do that within ourselves now. There is a turning place. A turn ye and live. Turn ye from a person born of the flesh who lives in the flesh as the flesh. And find a place where the human mind is taking no thought. For that human mind is of the flesh. And if you think with that which is of the flesh, you are separated from the Spirit. Take no thought for your mortal life, for you never had one. You never had a mortal life. The mortal has been the imitation of the immortal. The material has been the imitation of the spiritual. And right where the imitation appears, I am. I in the midst of you am your immortal life. I in the midst of you am your spiritual self. I in the midst of you am your being, and beside me there is no other. Your name is Spirit, immortal Spirit, without opposite, without a mortal selfhood. And that which appears as your mortal selfhood is a cosmic imitation of I in the midst of you. I in the midst of you am deathless. I am immortal. I will always be yourself. Abide in me, and let me rise in your consciousness as the risen Christ. Let me look out through your eyes at this world, and I will show you my kingdom on this earth. I will show you the immortal kingdom of God on this earth if you will let me look through your eyes. Receive me in your heart. Receive me in your soul. and know no other. With all your heart, mind, soul, and body, love me above all else, for I am the reality of your being. I am the Christ which has never left you and never can. I am the eternal Christ, Son of God. And I am your being. Abide in me. Let me abide in you. And you will bear fruit richly. For I will go before you. And I will perform all that you are appointed to do. I will even take you through the valley of the shadow of death, and you will fear no evil. For I will be there. And I will take you into your next consciousness. And I will take you into many mansions that the Father has prepared. Do you see that I am the way? I am the way out of the tomb of false mortality that has saddled this earth because it has been waiting for a second coming and ignoring that which is here now as the eternal Christ. Turn ye to this I, and then live out of this I, as this I, and let I live itself as you. This is immortality realized. And this turning is the birth of Christ realization. Let the outer consciousness put up its sword. It no longer need defend anything. I am the Lord. I who transformed water to wine. I who resurrected that which appeared to be dead. I who did the healing miracles on earth. I am the self of you. You need no defense. I am ever with you. What you need is the realization that I in the midst of thee am God. Accept my presence where you are. I in the midst of thee am God. Be still and know that I am God. I can never leave you. I will be with thee always, even unto the end of the world. Now this I is your immortal self, and your recognition of it raises you from the dead. It raises you from the dead now before the body decomposes. It raises you from the dead now before the mind is washed away in time. It raises you into the consciousness of Christ, which is eternal, which is deathless, which is the one and only power in all this world. I, the Christ within you, I live your life as my life. I prepare a table for you in the midst of every enemy on the face of the earth. You need no might, you need no power. My Spirit goes before you. Refer every problem back to I in the midst of you, and I will tell you, before you asked, I answered. Before you sought a healing, you were healed. The only you that needed a healing was the false consciousness, the mortal consciousness. I, the immortal consciousness of your being, is all there is of you. As you let the mortal consciousness die, I will rise and I will step out of the tomb of that mortal consciousness. Fear not, it is I. This is the message of immortality now. Not in the hereafter, not after we lay aside a physical body, not after a mythical, mortal being returns to earth. This is the message of the living Christ, the omnipresent Christ, the Christ that is your name. As we continue doing this, we find within ourselves a great new power. We have the power to bless the world. We can move forth, and the eye of me instantly looks through the density of human form, looks through the false conditions of human minds, and recognizes the I of itself as the only life, the only presence, the only body, the only being on this earth. There is only the I of your being on this earth, for your I is the infinite I. The immortal, infinite, eternal, unchanging, perfect I is your name. There is a great weight of world opinion which hangs over all of us. And when you look out upon this world and see the forms and the conditions, it would be well for you to know that the real obstacle out there is not a person, is not a condition. It is always world consciousness appearing before you as a person and a condition. And so this particular fellow who's obstructive or in some way objectionable, or this particular condition, this lack, this limitation, this disease, this suffering, none of these have their origin in God. And without being of a godly source, they can only exist in the world consciousness. And this forms itself seemingly external to your being. As we go along, you'll realize, or you probably do now, that there is nothing external to your being. It only seems to be external to your false mortal consciousness. And therefore translate everything that is objectionable before you as world consciousness, individualizing as that particular form of objection. And you'll find you're not fearing it quite as much, and even in the proper identification of it, there will be a tendency for it to dissolve right under your awareness of its truth. And so this situation called war, or this situation called hurricane, or this situation called supply, is only world consciousness appearing as the lack, as the war, as the disease. Get rid of those words and rest in the knowledge that world consciousness is merely approaching me in different masks, in different forms, in different conditions, but always it is the one counterfeit. World consciousness, which is presenting the good and the evil, the dualities. I need take no cognizance of them because I am spirit, incorporeal, immortal self. Now, wherever you recognize a mortal selfhood, whether it's in you or another, because God is not mortal, you are recognizing that something exists that is unlike God. This mortal over there is not God being. Well, then who is this mortal over there? This mortal over there is merely world consciousness appearing as a mortal being. There can be no real existence other than God. Everything must be retranslated from its false mortal appearance to the realization that you have only one enemy. And that enemy is the world consciousness taking infinite variety of forms. And if you recognize it here, you can recognize it there and everywhere. But what is it? It is the false mortal self, the false mortal mind, the imitation. And it will ultimately come into false mortal form if you do not reach it at its own level and see it for what it is. Nothingness. You're even impersonalizing the forms in front of you, the people. There is no mortal selfhood, and yet everyone appears to be a mortal self. If there is a mortal selfhood before you, you are in a mortal consciousness. If there is a Christ self before you, you are in a Christ consciousness. And what you see, therefore, is telling you where you stand. If you're seeing the Christ, you're in Christ consciousness. If you're seeing the mortal, you're in mortal consciousness. There can be no quibbling about it. And therefore, you're going to recognize the Christ there, because if you're not in Christ consciousness, you are subject to mortal law. You are subject to everything that is on the calendar today. If there's a flu bug schedule, you're going to have it. You're going to have an opportunity to have it. And therefore, we must live in the consciousness that there is an immortal self and an imitation mortal self on a worldwide level. There are not two worlds. In one level of your consciousness, you could live between two worlds. But now you're not between two worlds, because you recognize that only one exists, the immortal universe of my Father. The Word is the spiritual universe, and that is where you live, in the spiritual universe. You live in it by living in the consciousness of it. I am conscious of the spiritual universe. And all that is presented to me of the material universe is the imitation of my universe. Even that imitation form that I see in the mirror is an imitation of my spiritual form. And there's where you're abiding. And with it, you're not giving up the pleasures of this world. Never make the mistake of thinking that you are, or that you're supposed to. That you're supposed to suddenly will all your possessions to a dear friend who knows nothing about immortal consciousness. Nothing of the sort. We are being lifted to a higher life, a new dimension of life, in which the joys and the pleasures and the relationships are enduring, not subject to the laws of tomorrow's earthquake or tomorrow's change of weather. We are being lifted to the new kind of life in which we are independent of the laws of the material world. Not that we want to break their laws, but we simply are not encased in bodies of matter that are subject to the various viruses of the world. Now, Paul has this to say. Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump, for the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. For this corruptible must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality. So when this corruptible shall have put on incorruption, and this mortal should have put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. Now, it's about time that this becomes the consciousness of the world, not just a statement in a book. If spirit is God, if spirit is all, where can spirit go when it dies? Nowhere. Spirit is spirit. Where can you go? Nowhere. There's no place for us to go. We will always be where we are. And where we are is where we must learn to live. We are not here to live that we may die. We are here to live enduringly, and to live in the consciousness of ourself. Life has no opposite. Life is God. Life is immortal. Life knows nothing about age or time or decomposing processes, and I, being the spirit, the life, the immortal self, I have nothing to do with age, with deterioration, with decomposing bodies. None of that is yourself. And so you must shake off from your consciousness all of the world belief which has shrouded man in a mortal selfhood. Step out from it. There is no mortality on the earth. There is only my Father's Spirit. Now, when you meditate, if you have had a difficulty in meditation, you are as normal as apple pie. There is hardly anyone who doesn't have a difficulty in meditation. But you see, it's because a human being is trying to meditate. Whereas I am the meditator. You must turn to I and let I do all your meditating for you. And then you will find you don't have a problem in being still. You don't have a problem at all, because I becomes your new antenna. I is an infinite antenna. And your whole work is to touch I within yourself, day in and day out. And then when you release yourself to I, you'll find you're in infinite meditation. And you are trusting I to become visibly every need that you will have for this day. I will be your wine and your water. I am the bread of life. You're finding the miracle that I really becomes supply. I becomes everything that you had been seeking in a mortal consciousness, and it becomes all that you need, the added things, the essentials. It becomes all the things you need of this world. That's why it's called the added things. And those of us who have been able to live in this I even to a measure, have witnessed the miracle that I, whom you believe in, is doing on earth today what I have ever done. I do not shorten the arm of the Father. My words do not return to me void. I bow to no human powers. I leave no death and destruction behind me. I have not come to destroy, but to fulfill. And this great miracle of I within you, which is self-fulfilling, becomes a living reality to you. Until there is no to you at all, there's just I. I am I. And no longer is there a me sitting down to meditate, waiting for the wind to blow somewhere and blow spirit into my consciousness. There is no such me. There is only I. The immortal self. There's no mortal being trying to get spirit to do something. It can't be done. Let us all graduate from the belief that a mortal can get spirit to do something. As we live in I, we're no longer trying to get anything. Or if we are, we find out soon enough it can't be done. We're just wasting energy. We're not interested in getting. We're interested in giving. We're interested in letting the well of our own infinite life pump forth that which is needed, with 12 baskets left over. We have learned the secret of reversing the senses. That whereas yesterday the eye reached out and the hand reached out, all of me reached out to acquire, to pull in, to a mortal self that wasn't there but I thought was there. Now the immortal self wants to push out to those who do not know their immortality. You can't get it fast enough from within to give it out, because this is the nature of spirit. A continuous progression of unfolding from within. The kingdom of God within you is your new spiritual consciousness. It has no bottom. It has no top. It has no sides. It is limitless. And you're living from that center, resting in I, and lo and behold, I becomes tomorrow's bank account. I becomes tomorrow's food supply. I becomes companionship. I becomes all that an individual needs on the mortal plane, and I continues to lift you into planes beyond. Many of us, when we started out, might have thought we'd be satisfied with just a little leaven. But we find there's no stopping place in spirit. The minute you stop, you're back in mortality. There is no stopping place. We must ever be poor in spirit for the simple reason that the unfoldment of spirit must be infinite. And now we are letting life move at its own rhythm. We are dropping our attempt to control life. We find that our attempt to control life brings us into mortal mind. We are feeling the pulse of an infinite rhythm, and we find that it is perfect in its dominion over every material law. It recognizes no disease, no lack or limitation. It dissolves every untrue mortal appearance. My immortal self is self-fulfilling in every way. My immortal self can never leave. There is no other me than my immortal self. And there is no other you than your immortal self. And now if I want to present to you a picture of a mortal being, it is your function to look right through what I present and to witness only the immortal self that stands before you. As you forgive me my trespasses, you will be forgiven. As you recognize my immortality in spite of what I may do as a human being, you are recognizing your own immortality. And that is the nature of forgiveness. To thine own immortality be true. Now, once you have accepted this, what is the nature of your being now that you are the immortal self? The nature of your being is such that whatever is true of God is true of you. Whenever you use the word God, you're speaking of your immortal self. Whatever is untrue of God is untrue of you. If God does not destroy, you do not destroy. If God cannot be destroyed, you cannot be destroyed. If God cannot be sick, you cannot be sick. If God cannot lack, you cannot lack. If God has no evil in God, then there's no evil in you. There can never be something true of God that is untrue of you, or true of you that is untrue of God. For there is only the one immortal self. And the longer you find your ability to live in it, the longer you are a righteous man. Now we're way past the scribes and the Pharisees. Our righteousness is the righteousness of immortality. The self that is ever the self called God. As you dwell in this knowledge, you can cancel out, you can literally crucify all of the beliefs that in any tomorrow you can have a lack or a limitation or a problem. They can only occur in a false self. If you are in my immortal self, then all of your tomorrows are already perfect in truth. And so this is the work you do in your meditation. You nullify the million tomorrows that are going to make their demands by recognizing my immortal self knows nothing about tomorrows. My immortal self is not waiting for time to unfold. My immortal self is the finished kingdom of God on earth now. All that I need is already established in my immortal self. Mortality, with its varying problems from day to day, is the false identity that I have put off. That was the corruptible. I have put on incorruption. And every time I have a problem, regardless of its nature, that is the lie about God that is presenting itself to me through a false consciousness. And the lie needs no one to defend against it. That which is not truth is but a phantom. It may appear very real to you, but only truth is real. Only truth can be substance. Only truth is under the law. And whatever is a lie, you can stand against it at any time with no defense whatsoever, provided you are not in a false consciousness. For in your false consciousness you'll turn from one problem and you'll be hit by another. So immortality and freedom are synonyms. True identity and freedom are one and the same. Your freedom is inherent in your immortal self. Now this turning that takes place within you, this identification as I, is going to make you one with I throughout the infinite universe. Wherever you touch I within you, you touch I within every person on the face of the globe, and I within all those who have walked the earth and who are no longer visible. And you touch the I of those who are still unborn and who will walk the earth later. The I of you, when you touch it, in your consciousness, is the infinite I called God. And you are now the individualization of that I. You are infinity individualized. And all of infinity is functioning through your being. Immortality is never separate from itself. Now, just for luxury's sake, without trying to channel, manipulate, without striving in any way to bring something good into your humanhood, without striving to make your humanhood better in any way, without striving to get more of this or more of that for your humanhood, remember that the spiritual way is to step out of your humanhood. Not to improve it, but to step out of it. And to let your incorporeal being govern every activity of your day. And lo and behold, there's a better human out there anyway. Healthier, wiser, safer, more protected, because you must learn how to let the invisible run the visible. When you walk out in the visible and try to govern it, you're working with a phantom. When you let the invisible have its way, then lo and behold, by some strange, wonderful alchemy of the Spirit, the visible is in harmony. Learn that great, thrilling secret, that when I am still, trusting my infinite, immortal self to be itself, I am in the consciousness of plenty, the consciousness of beauty, the consciousness of harmony, the consciousness of love. But don't get it out there. Get it where you are. In you is I. And then get rid of that in you. And know that I is all that is here. I is my being. And it moves out into the universe. Where does it end? Where do I begin and where do I end? I have no beginning. I have no end in space or time. The I of me is running through the I of you. And the I of you is running through the I of me. Where do we begin and end? We do not. We are that one I. Do you see why we must learn forbearance, forgiveness, even to those who are still stumbling up the ladder of consciousness? even if there are a rung or two or three below us, just as we want those who are a rung or two or three above us to help us by their understanding that we at least are moving in the direction of truth. And so up and down the ladder of consciousness, we recognize the infinite I. And scowl if you will, be angry if you will, be vengeful if you will, I will strive to see I as your name. And as long as I'm trying to do that, I must succeed. And let the world scowl at you. Let it bring all kinds of pressures upon you. Recognize the I of it and the I of you. And then say, Peter, put up your sword. Forget it. Forget all of it, the antagonisms, the repressions, the frustrations, the doubts, the fears, the wonderments. I is on the field, and I is the only one on the field. And I can blindfold myself, I can turn backwards and know I is there. I don't have to second guess it, I don't have to keep one eye open to watch what it will do. I is on the field. I is ever on the field. I is ever running its perfect universe, and there is no other universe than that invisible perfect universe of I. Live in it. Live in that invisible perfect universe, no matter what you see. And the law of externalization will take place. That which is your belief in consciousness, if it is the truth, the law is that the truth will make you free. How? The truth that you know in consciousness must externalize itself into form. There is no power on earth to stop it. Spirit and its manifestation are one. The Word must become flesh. But there must be someone to recognize that I am the Word. I am the Word made flesh. There is oneness there, and oneness is spiritual power. Now we gain nothing by letting our emotions take hold. We gain nothing by letting the human mind respond to the sensations that come through the universe. We gain nothing by the pains and pleasures of this world, because all must pass. We gain nothing by seeking those things that must perish. But we do gain ourselves by laboring for the meat that does not perish but endureth forever. Laboring for the consciousness of the invisible spiritual kingdom all around us. Then the fruits of that kingdom must appear. Wherever you see a mortal being or hear about the mortal race, don't think because you haven't done something about it that it hasn't entered your consciousness. Don't think because you didn't join in and agree that it didn't have its impression upon you. There must be a conscious rejection of every influence, of every lie about your infinite immortal self. That's what this is all about. The day in and day out conscious rejection of what I'm not, so that what I am can show forth the glory of God on earth. Now, what better vocation can we find? Wherever we are, whatever we're doing, to live in the consciousness that this, that I am, is God itself. And it isn't wearing a physical body, it isn't in a mortal form, but it's here, and it's there, and it's around the corner, and it's right under that stone over there. It's right behind that house over there. All of these physical appearances must be dissolved in your consciousness in the realization that they too will perish, but I, the living Spirit of God, am forever. And I do not yield my dominion to that which will perish. Let it resolve itself inside your consciousness until that strange phenomenon called the voice assures you that I am come. You have walked through the door. I am the door. You have walked through the door. You have turned within. You have caught the infinity of being. You're not localized. You're omnipresent. You're everywhere. You're not flesh. You're spirit. And you can feel the presence of spirit as your being. You will see that this spirit, this presence that I am, is what formed me in the womb. This presence will ever go before me presenting new forms. This presence is my infinite being. This presence is the only way that I can live in the kingdom of God on earth. This presence is my Father, and this presence is I. This presence, my Father, and this presence, I, are infinity, and infinity individualized, and I am that one. Whoever lives in this consciousness will find the power of spirit never fails. If you enter it with doubt, your doubt will reflect itself. If you enter it with the ability to lay down the attitude of show me, prove something, you will discover that proof which the mortal had sought but couldn't find. The Spirit will never prove anything to a non-existent mortal. The Spirit will never shower its abundance on a non-existent mortal. The Spirit will never heal a mortal being. But as you lay down the garment of mortality, your immortal self reveals itself as that which you had sought when you were speaking out of a mortal consciousness. Your immortal self is the whole, complete being that you have been seeking through the falsehood of a mortal consciousness. As you lay down this mortal being, all that you had been seeking is revealed as the nature of your true being. Now, as you catch these subtleties, then, you won't be tempted by the decoys to heal the foot, to heal the heart, to heal the virus, to heal anything. who wants to heal that which does not exist. That's yesterday's consciousness. We're not looking for healings. We are that which is the immortal, perfect self. And that is the eternal healing of all that needed healings. We're not looking for supply. We're not looking for a longer life. We're not settling for fractions. I am life. I am truth. I am health. I am immortal self. You can't heal me. There's nothing to heal. And that is the consciousness we're trying to build now. Above the mortal desires and plans and ambitions and fears and doubts and wants. And there's not one of us who can't, within himself, rest in that and feel the self-healing influence of your own immortal being. Perpetually self-healed of everything. Thou seest me, thou seest the Father. And the Father is not sick, not limited, not lacking. Are you that self? If you're not, you need healing. If you are, you need no healing. And so today we're all becoming the one who needs no healing. For I am the Spirit of God. That should be our permanent goal until we awaken each day to that consciousness which makes each day a divine day. So we have our sights set for us. I might tell you this house is called Immortality House for one reason. It was given in meditation for one thing. But as you see this chapter of immortality, this is the truth of our being. And house is the consciousness. And I'd like you to know that when you come here, you're entering the consciousness of immortality. And perhaps when you come and bring that consciousness, then you are Immortality House too. And we are all in Immortality House, the consciousness of our immortal being. That's the purpose of this name that was given to us by the Spirit. So that each of us can be aware that our consciousness must be the consciousness of immortality. Next week is spiritual illumination. And you'll find that the eye of you already is illuminated. So naturally, if you were in the eye, we wouldn't see you next week. And maybe we won't. The eye of you released is the spiritual illumination we will discuss in this second chapter. I'd like to meet those of you I haven't met before and thank those of you who have come today. I should like also to suggest that in the future classes, inasmuch as you know what each chapter will be, that you possibly, having read it before you come, might have some questions. And so, if you have a question on any chapter, why don't you just type it or write it up, put it on this little podium here, and I'll try to be sure that before you leave you have an answer. That way, we can go through this book and all come out of it with the knowledge that I understand it. There's nothing in it that's puzzling me. And with that, of course, we can develop our consciousness to the point that when we say infinite way, we mean my consciousness, my infinite consciousness. Thanks very much.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into our channel. If you're enjoying the content, don't forget to hit that like button below. It really helps us out. And why not share this video with your friends? Spread the word and help us reach more people. Lastly, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notifications so you never miss a new video from us. Thanks for watching and see you next time.